It's important to show why we're different from the enemy, because we're not the enemy, right? We're different from our adversary. Would you agree with that? We have different morals and different values.
We are not the enemy, sir.
We have different morals and we have different values than the enemy. The answer to that is yes.
Formations that
You're not trying to compare us to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, are you? We're different.
I know the code of the United States military and army that I signed up for.
You can't tell me whether we're different?
Right hand.
You're not willing to say we're different?
Of course we're different.
Okay, thank you. Fort Bragg and our beloved 82nd Airborne Division, sitting there while we politicize the military and pull our paratroopers into politics, booing elected officials, booing politicians with whom you disagree. It's antithetical to our values, and you, sir, have changed.
Time's expired.
A document exists with Pete Hegseth's name on it. He wrote it. He taught it. He signed off on it. It says that if you kill 2 innocents in combat, you have set yourself back more than you have moved forward. That principle is now sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere inside the Pentagon, collecting dust, while the man who wrote it fires the lawyers responsible for enforcing it, dismisses the Geneva Convention in writing, removes every senior military official who might push back on him, and presides over an active war with no clear exit strategy and 13 Americans already dead, and in Washington, quietly but with increasing urgency, a word is starting to be spoken in rooms where these decisions are being watched most closely. That word is impeachment. Nothing has been filed yet. Nothing has been voted on yet. But the documented record of what Pete Hegseth has done in that office is building toward a question that members of Congress are beginning to ask out loud. And a congressman who led the same kind of platoon in the same kind of war, in the same counterinsurgency environment as Hegseth, just sat across from him and asked the question that sits underneath all of it. How do you reconcile the man who wrote that document with the man sitting in that chair right now? Watch what happens when Hegseth tries to answer, because what he says in that room and what he cannot say may turn out to be exactly the kind of record that those conversations in Washington are being built around.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Kane, Secretary Hegseth, and Mrs. McDonald. You're doing a great job today, Mrs. McDonald. Secretary Hegseth, we have a lot of things in common. In fact, our careers started the same way. We were both infantry officers. We were both platoon leaders. We both deployed our platoons to combat in a counterinsurgency environment. There are very few better leadership training grounds in that experience, and it's that experience that I want to transport us back into time, back to Lieutenant Hegseth and Lieutenant Crow. There are a lot of things that make a leader and that make a unit effective. Would you say that unit cohesion is important?
Unit cohesion amongst many is very important, yes, sir.
It's an important element. And part of that is making sure that all members of your unit felt included in that team, correct?
Far more important that every member of that unit felt capable to do the mission and united in that mission.
But that they were included and felt part of the team as well.
I wouldn't use the word inclusion, sir, but yes, they were cohering as a team, yes.
And that you reduce tension and infighting and points of tension between your platoon members so that you can focus on the mission. That was a part of the regular job.
Absolutely. That's why I've said that our diversity is our strength is the single dumbest phrase in military history.
And words are
our
important.
Unity is our strength. And so unity amongst members, despite differences of backgrounds, race, whatever that is.
And I agree with you on that.
Together on a mission.
And part of that is words are important and setting the tone is important, correct? When you're a leader.
All aspects of leadership, mostly leading by example.
Did you ever tell them your political affiliation?
Guidance.
Did you ever tell your platoon members your political affiliation?
We certainly discussed lots of topics, and I'm sure my political affiliation.
Did you ever ask them theirs?
No, their political affiliation was never a concern to me.
Because it's important that everybody feel included and that people weren't excluded, correct? That would be antithetical to leadership.
I'm sure my platoon contained Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, and I had no idea what their affiliation was.
Okay, that was actually my next question, so I appreciate you answering that. You led your unit in a counterinsurgency environment, and you interacted with civilians, correct?
Interacted with members of the civilian population, sure.
And you were, in fact, a COIN instructor, a counterinsurgency instructor, correct?
In Afghanistan in 2011 and 2012, I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor.
And you signed off on a manual. There's actually a counterinsurgency manual that you signed off on and helped create. And your name is on that manual, correct?
We were a part of creating a lot of content at the COIN Academy, yes.
Do you remember this portion of the manual? It says, if you've killed 2 innocents, you've set yourself back more than you've moved forward. Do you still agree with that?
I would have to take a look at the manual, but obviously no one in warfare is seeking to kill innocents.
Okay. Because it's important to show why we're different from the enemy. Because we're not the enemy, right? We're different from our adversary. Would you agree with that? We have different morals and different values.
We are not the enemy, sir.
We have different morals and we have different values than the enemy.
We have a code, a uniform code of military justice.
So the answer to that is
inside
yes.
our formations that
You're not trying to compare us to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, are you? We're different.
I know the code of the United States military and army that I signed
You
up for.
can't tell me whether we're
Raise my
different?
right hand.
You're not willing to say we're different?
Of course we're different.
Okay, thank you.
It's absurd.
That's why I'm trying to reconcile the fact that we learned many of the same lessons as platoon leaders about unit cohesion, making sure that people were included, that we didn't ask people's political affiliation, that we interacted respectfully with civilian populations, that what a leader says matters, that the tone you set matters, that we are not the enemy, that we are different from them, we lead differently, we have different morals. How can I reconcile that experience and those lessons learned from Lieutenant Hegseth to now Secretary Hegseth, where you say things like what you just saw here, making us equivalent on the same standards as our adversaries, doing the same things that ISIS and Al-Qaeda would do? How can you possibly reconcile that? I can't. And just the other day down at Fort Bragg in our beloved 82nd Airborne Division, sitting there while we politicize the military and pull our paratroopers into politics, booing elected officials, booing politicians with whom you disagree. It's antithetical to our values, and you, sir, have changed.
Time's expired.
So here is what you just watched, and here is the full documented picture behind it. Congressman Crow did something methodical in that exchange. He did not attack Hegseth. He walked him through a series of principles that Hegseth himself had already agreed to. Unit cohesion matters. Political affiliation should never divide a unit. Respectful interaction with civilian populations is essential. Words and tones set by leaders matter. America is different from its enemies. We have different morals and different values. Hegseth agreed to every single one of those principles in the room. And then Crow pointed out the contradiction. The man who agreed to all of those principles in that hearing room is the same man who has spent the past year doing the opposite of every single one of them outside of it. He said diversity is our strength is the single dumbest phrase in military history, a statement that by definition created division inside a military built from Americans of every background. He fired generals not for incompetence or misconduct, but for failing to demonstrate sufficient personal loyalty, which is the definition of making political affiliation a criterion for military leadership. He fired the lawyers responsible for ensuring the military operates within the laws of war, creating what legal analysts described as a more permissive command climate toward the very war crimes that manual was designed to prevent. And soldiers at Fort Bragg were booing elected officials at a military event, which Crow correctly identified as antithetical to everything both of them were taught as platoon leaders. Hegseth could not reconcile those contradictions. He said it was absurd to even draw the comparison, but he could not explain the gap between what Lieutenant Hegseth taught and what Secretary Hegseth has done. Now, here is where the story gets more serious than a single hearing exchange. And here is the part that is starting to be discussed in Washington in ways that have not yet reached the public conversation fully. When you look at the pattern of what Hegseth has done as Secretary of Defense, it does not look like the work of someone building toward a long tenure. It looks like the work of someone executing a specific agenda as fast as possible before the window closes. More than a dozen generals fired The judge advocate's fired. The intelligence director fired after contradicting Trump on Iran. The army chief of staff fired in the middle of a war. Troops deployed domestically without gubernatorial permission. A war started without congressional authorization. And a $200 billion emergency funding request on top of an already historic defense budget, while domestic programs are being cut simultaneously. Each one of those decisions has generated documented opposition, not just from Democrats, but from Republicans, from military officers, from legal scholars, and from inside the Pentagon itself. And now consider this documented sequence of events. Hegseth's counterterrorism director resigned in protest of the Iran war before it began, saying Iran posed no imminent threat. The Army Chief of Staff was fired after refusing to remove black and female officers from promotion lists. The head of the Defense Intelligence Agency was fired after his assessment of Iran's nuclear facilities contradicted Trump's public claims. The intelligence community's director of national intelligence admitted under oath that only the president can determine what is an imminent threat, essentially removing the intelligence community's independent role in that judgment. What does it look like when you remove every senior military and intelligence official who might push back? What does it look like when you fire the lawyers who enforce the laws of war? What does it look like when you start a war without congressional authorization, deploy troops domestically without gubernatorial permission, and request $200 billion in emergency military funding while cutting Medicaid? It looks like something that cannot be sustained indefinitely. And in Washington, conversations are beginning quietly and carefully about what happens next. The word impeachment has been used, not yet in formal proceedings, but by members of Congress who have watched Hegseth deploy troops against American citizens, refuse to answer whether military cyber tools are being used to surveil protesters, dismiss a documented account of an order to shoot American citizens with a Bible joke, and fire the Army's top general in the middle of an active war for refusing to discriminate in military promotions. Is a formal impeachment push coming? Nothing has been filed. Nothing has been voted on. But the documented record of what Hegseth has done as Secretary of Defense, the laws potentially violated, the constitutional boundaries potentially crossed, the documented contradictions between what he testified under oath and what he has done in office is the kind of record that formally triggers those conversations. And there is another question being asked even more quietly. How long before Trump himself decides that a Secretary of Defense who is generating this much documented controversy, who is drawing this much bipartisan criticism, who is presiding over a war that is now costing $200 billion in emergency funding with no clear exit strategy, becomes more liability than asset? Trump has shown repeatedly that loyalty runs in one direction. Kristi Noem was fired. Pam Bondi was fired. The pattern is documented. When someone stops being useful, they are gone. Does Pete Hegseth know that? Does the man who signed a counterinsurgency manual about protecting innocent lives and then fired the lawyers responsible for enforcing that principle understand that the same president who gave him this job has shown no loyalty to anyone? Once the political calculation changes, Congressman Crow asked how he reconciles Lieutenant Hegseth with Secretary Hegseth. That is the right question for this moment. But there may be another question coming soon that nobody in that hearing room was ready to ask yet. What happens when the president who put him there decides the reconciliation is no longer worth the cost? If you think this kind of accountability coverage matters, subscribe and stay with us. This story is developing faster than most people realize.